Chapter 7. The Road to Heaven. The conquest of Jerusalem marked a significant moment in the history of Europe. Suddenly, kings, knights, and religious leaders had to think about how to hold on to a series of colonies in the Middle East. One of the most important issues was how to supply the men who were already there. The Crusaders themselves had realized in the days after taking Jerusalem that they needed to work with the local communities rather than against them if they wanted to survive. It was all very well wanting to murder those with different religious beliefs, but another approach was needed if you had to buy food and other materials. The Christian knights were surrounded by enemies and potential enemies. Learning how to deal with them took time and skill. Support came from cities in Europe that could help supply goods by sea. Pisa, Genoa, and Venice saw a golden opportunity to combine faith with business. There were healthy profits to be made from shipping much-needed goods to the Holy Land and selling them to those living there. In fact, competition was so intense that sometimes these cities acted as rivals rather than allies in their attempts to support the Crusader states in the East. This was because opening up routes to the Holy Land did not just offer the chance to make money by selling things to the Christians there, it also provided the chance to buy goods and ship them back. These goods included a long list such as pepper, cinnamon, alum, varnish, nutmeg, cloves, sugar, incense, cardamom, ammonia, ivory, and much more besides. The vast majority of these items did not originate in the Holy Land, but were transited there via trade routes controlled by the Muslims, including through the ports of Egypt, which exported an impressive catalogue of spices, textiles, and luxury objects. Big fortunes could be made along the trade routes linking east with west. One clever investor did so well from shipping goods from India and China that he was able to pay for renovations in the holy city of Mecca, and even had the rare privilege of being buried there when he died. Ideas also spread in this time. Scholars in Europe pored over books about science, mathematics, and algorithmic tables from libraries in cities such as Antioch and Damascus, as well as works from Constantinople, explaining ancient Greek philosophy. Later, others complained about changes brought about by the Crusades. One Arabic writer noted that Muslim fleets had once had such complete command of the seas that Christians were not even able to float a plank in them. Initially, though, reactions to the arrival of the Crusaders was limited, barely registering a flicker of interest in the Muslim world. Although the Crusaders had fought hard to get Jerusalem and met with some early resistance, it took time for them to be any major response. This annoyed some. One judge was appalled and supposedly stormed into the caliph's court in Baghdad to complain about the lack of reaction to the arrival of armies from Europe. He accused the ruler and his friends of enjoying an easy life rather than rushing to repel the Christian conquerors. This gave the Crusaders time to embed themselves in the Holy Land and to start building relations with local communities and leaders, including many Muslims. However, there were often tensions between the Crusaders and their neighbors, and in the 1180s, the tables began to turn. At that time, a very smart general named Saladin managed to unite the Muslim world. In 1187, he inflicted a crushing defeat on the Christian knights at the Horns of Hattin, a famous battle that consequently broke the Crusaders' kingdom. Saladin was a magnificent victor, offering the king of Jerusalem iced sherbet to revive him after he was captured in battle. Soon after, the city itself surrendered, when terms were agreed to spare the inhabitants. It was a humiliating blow for the Christian world and for Europe's connections with the East. So terrible was the news that Jerusalem had fallen that the Pope dropped dead in shock when he heard it. His successor blamed the sins of its inhabitants, as well as those of the whole Christian people, and urged a mighty response. The fall of Jerusalem sent shockwaves across Christendom. A huge expedition set off as a result, led by the three most powerful men in Europe: Richard the Lionheart, King of England, Philip II of France, and Frederick Barbarossa, the Holy Roman Emperor. They achieved almost nothing, and a decade or so later, another ambitious plan was set in motion to recover the Holy Land. This time, the plan was not to go straight to Jerusalem and the ports that served it, but to head first for Egypt, whose inhabitants were so rich they were said to be devoted to luxurious living. This was altogether a more exciting target for the Venetians, and they were the ones paying for the attack. But this didn't go to plan either. Costs spiraled out of control, while poor leadership and chaotic decisions led to the Crusaders attacking the Christian city of Zadar in near Croatia, despite the inhabitants draping banners marked with crosses over the walls, and even though the Crusaders had been warned by the Pope to leave the city alone. But Venice had long had its eye on Zadar and attacked it anyway, and then, rather than heading onwards to Jerusalem as planned, the fleet diverted to Constantinople, drawn by the promise of money. In 1204, after waiting in vain to be paid off, the Crusaders stormed the great capital of the Byzantine Empire. Constantinople was devastated as all hell broke loose. Treasuries were stripped bare, while the most famous sacred relics were stolen. The act would end in the city being divided up between the conquerors, along with the best lands of the empire. The Crusades, which were supposed to be about serving God, had become an excuse to use religion in order to gain power and riches. And it was not long before yet another expedition set out to recover the Holy Land. These crusaders quickly got into trouble following an ill-judged attempt to take Cairo in the 1220s, and soon faced a devastating defeat. Then news came that a huge army was advancing from the east. Reports were patchy, but they chimed with legends of a mighty Christian king who ruled over immense lands where milk and honey flowed freely, where there were no snakes, and where poison could do no harm. The reports were wrong. The forces galloping across Asia did not belong to a friendly monarch riding to the aid of the Crusaders, after all. In fact, they were warriors from Mongolia, and their leader was one of the most famous people in history, Genghis Khan.